Hello students and welcome to today's lesson, A Visit of Charity by Eudora Welty. This is the second part of the lesson. It is being presented by Dr. P.V. Geeta Lakshmi Patnaik of BJR Government Degree College, Narayanguda, Hyderabad. If you remember students, we have already discussed a few things about this short story. We have looked at a brief biography of the writer, Eudora Welty. We have also taken a look at the glossary of important words, and we have discussed the first part of the lesson. So let us take a very quick look once again at the introduction of the author. Eudora Welty was born in 1909 in Jackson, Mississippi. She was very highly educated and she had studied at the Mississippi State College for Women in Columbus, the University of Wisconsin, and at the Columbia University School of Business. Her first publication was a short story, Death of a Traveling Salesman. Her first book was A Curtain of Green, and actually this was published in 1936, and A Curtain of Green was published in 1941. And these are the other books that she had written. And she won the Pulitzer Prize in 1973 for her book, The Optimist's Daughter, which was published in 1972. What is interesting is that Eudora Welty believes that the artist must look squarely at the mysteries of human experiences without trying to resolve them. So Eudora's Welty's ability to reveal rather than explain mystery is what is most interesting. So she doesn't try to explain things. She only depicts certain things and leaves it at that, and she leaves it to the reader's understanding. And this is a very interesting quality in a writer students. And she has received, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the French Legion of Honor, two very important and very, very prestigious awards. She also served as a subject of a BBC documentary, and she was chosen as the first living writer to be published in the Library of America series. She died on the 23rd of July, 2001 in Jackson, Mississippi. So this then is the introduction to the author or the writer of the story, Eudora Welty. So this is let us have a very quick look at the previous lesson, whatever we have read in the previous lesson. Eudora Welty was an American short story writer, a prolific writer. She wrote numerous stories in multiple genres. Her stories often portray relationships between individuals and their communities. A Visit of Charity is one of her most important short stories and was first published in a small literary journal in 1941. It is the story of 14-year-old Marianne and her visit to an old lady's home. Marianne is a campfire girl and has arrived at the home to visit any old woman and present her with a potted plant. It's interesting to note that her motive is not altruistic or selfless, because she does this in order to win a few points as a campfire volunteer. So we have already discussed about Campfire Girls. So you know that it is a voluntary organization, and this is where young girls especially, and then later on even young boys, are actually taught how to live in nature and how to live with the community and how to become good, honest and upright citizens. So this is a story which talks about a young girl, Marianne, who is actually a campfire volunteer, but then decides to visit an old age home or an old lady's home, because she wants to win extra points. So the writer is trying to point out that her motive is not a selfless motive. She does this because she has some personal gain. So Marianne enters the home, approaches the nurse at the reception, introduces herself and states her purpose. And her purpose is that she needs to meet any old woman because she has to score at least 3 points. And she has already brought along with her a potted plant, and she intends to give this as a present. The nurse takes her down the corridor and, hearing a noise behind a door, stops in front of it and raps on it. This is where we had stopped in our previous lesson. Previous class. So let us now go forward. But before that, let us take a very quick look, students, at the glossary of the difficult words in the story. Acquaintance. Acquaintance is someone you have met a few times but do not know very well. Awry means abnormal, something that is unexpected or unusual. Bleat is a weak cry that a sheep or goat makes. Cameo pin is a type of decorative ornament or brooch which contains a carving or painting. Close cut hair in this context means a hairstyle where the hair length is quite short. Clutch is to hold something tightly. Counterpane is a bedspread. Crow here in this context means to laugh or croak in a proud way, to gloat over someone else's misfortune. Damp is slightly wet. Double rap here in this context means to knock on the door twice in quick succession. Enormous means that which is very large in size or quantity. Fogginess in this context means unclear or confused. Imperial is it means in an arrogant or domineering way. Linoleum is a type of floor covering used to make the floor harder and shinier. Mitten is a type of glove worn in winter and used to keep your hands very warm. Outskirts is the outer parts of a city or town. Petunia is a flower with white, purple, or red leaves. Potted means grown in a flower pot. Propel is to push someone or something forwards. Retrieve is to bring or get something back from somewhere. Rigmarole is a long, rambling story. Shrug is a gesture in which you raise your shoulders slightly and drop them, and it is used to express doubt, ignorance, or indifference. Spitefully is to act or speak in a manner that is cruel to others. Tongue-tied means too shy, embarrassed, or scared to speak. Vague means unclear, uncertain. Whimper means to cry weakly or softly. Whitewashed means that which has been painted white using a solution of lime and water. Wicker, it refers to twigs that are flexible and can be woven together to make furniture or baskets. Okay then students, let us now take a look at the story. So as we have already seen, the story begins in mid-morning and the narrator describes it as a very cold, bright day. And here is a description of a young girl of 14 who has a potted plant in her hands, and she jumps off the bus in front of the old lady's home, which is situated on the outskirts of town. The girl is described as wearing a red coat and she has a straight yellow hair hanging down loose from the pointed white cap that she's wearing. And before she comes to the building, she stops at a prickly dark bush for a moment and then proceeds. So the narrator describes the, as prickly dark shrubs as something which the city had, planted in order to beautify the home. And then there is the description of the old lady's home, which is supposed to be whitewashed, which is made up of whitewashed brick, and it reflects the winter sunlight like a block of ice. So it's very cold. It looks very white, and it reflects this, the ice, the sunlight, which reflects off the ice, is actually making the house also look like a block of ice. And the girl walks up the steps, and there is a description about the way she walks. The writer says that she walks very vaguely up the steps. So the implication, as I mentioned in our previous class, the implication is that she's very reluctant to actually come to this place. It's not as though she's very enthusiastic about it. And then before she opens the door, she removes her mittens. She's wearing her mittens because it's very cold. So this particular paragraph, which is the introductory paragraph in the story, is very important, students, because it does two very important things. It tells us, or it gives us, the setting of the story, number one, and number two, it introduces us to the protagonist of the story. Now, let us see the title. The title is A Visit of Charity. So who is performing this visit of charity? It is nobody, none other than this young girl who is actually performing, or she is doing this visit of charity. So she is the most important character in this story, and the story is written from her perspective. So this is the introduction. The first paragraph functions like an introduction, or what is known as an exposition to the actual story. So like I said, we also have the setting. The setting, students, refers to not only the place, it also refers to the time. So here we have the place, which is the old lady's home, and it is actually situated on the outskirts of town. And we also have the time. The time is mid-morning, and it is a very cold, bright day. It is a very cold, bright day in winter, obviously, because we can see that there is snow all around. right? So we have the setting and we also have the introduction of the young girl, the protagonist. So this girl enters the young girl, we still don't know her name. She enters the old lady's home and she says, I'm a campfire girl. And she tells the nurse at the desk that she has to visit, she has come here to pay a visit to some old lady. And there is a description of the nurse. She's wearing a white uniform and it looks as though she's very cold. It's not only the temperature which is cold, it is also her behavior which is cold. This is what the writer is trying to tell us. So she had very close cut hair and it stood up on top of her head like a sea wave, says the writer. Now here is the girl being introduced to us, Marianne, the little girl. This is when the name is given to us. We are told that her name is Marianne. So the girl doesn't tell the nurse that she only gets 3 points in this because of this visit. She's very tongue-tied. She doesn't know what to say. And then the nurse asks her whether she's acquainted with any of the residents. And the girl is very flustered. She's very confused. And she says, no, I don't know anybody. Anybody would be okay. And with a free hand, says the writer, the girl pushed her hair behind the ears as she did when it was time to study science. Please remember what I said earlier. This is because, you can also infer it from the situation. This is because the girl is not probably very comfortable with science, and so she gets nervous when she has to study science. So this shows that Marianne is nervous even now. So she is performing a gesture which she usually performs when she is nervous. So the nurse says that that she gives a compliment and she says that you have a nice multiflora cineraria there, she says. And then she walks ahead and she asks the girl to follow her. The next paragraph is all about the description of the corridor, the passage. So this is very interesting, students, because the floor has linoleum on it and it is all loose and bulging. So as you can make out, this shows that there is not proper maintenance. There is no proper maintenance in this old lady's home. Nobody is really bothered about the maintenance of this building because nobody is really bothered about the inmates. So this is what we can infer. So Marianne feels as if she's walking on the waves. So she's finding it very, very uncomfortable and very unusual to, find a place where the linoleum is not being, properly laid down. And but the nurse pays no attention to it because the nurse is used to it. She's been actually, like we discussed before, the nurse is used to having all these inconveniences. And the girl notices that there is a very strange smell in the hall, which is probably a very metallic kind of a smell because it is like the interior of a clock, says the narrator. Everything was silent until behind one of the doors, an old lady of some kind, look at the way the old lady is described, an old lady of some kind cleared her throat like a sheep bleating. So it's not even as though she's a human being. So the noise or the sound that she makes is compared to the sound of a sheep bleating. So this old woman is compared to a sheep, which is actually not very complimentary. And so the nurse decides to stop them because probably all the other old women or other inmates are all asleep. So she decides to stop at this particular room and she decides to take this young girl inside and introduce her to the inmates. So she stops in her tracks and she does a very strange, what is called a triple motion, like she extends her arm and then she bends her elbow and then she leans forward from the hips, all because she wants to examine the watch which is strapped to her wrist. Then she gave a loud double rap on the door, says the writer. And what happens next? This is where we had stopped, students, and now let us move ahead. Now we see what is going to happen here. One old woman was pulling the door open in short, gradual jerks. And when she saw the nurse, a strange smile forced her old face dangerously awry. Marianne, suddenly propelled by the strong, impatient arm of the nurse, saw next the side face of another woman, even older, who was lying flat in bed with a cap on and a counterpane drawn up to her chin. "Visitor," said the nurse, and after one more shove, she was off up the hall. Marianne stood tongue-tied. Both hands held the potted plant. The old woman, still with that terrible square smile, which was a smile of welcome, stamped on her bony face, was waiting. Perhaps she said something. The old woman in bed said nothing at all, and she did not look around. So this is a very crucial point, students, because this is where Marianne, the protagonist of the story, is introduced to the other two main characters in the story. So all put together, we only have four characters in the story, students, as we will see later on. One is Marianne, of course, the next one is the nurse, and then we have these two old women. So you see how one old woman is pulling the door open in short, gradual jerks, probably because she doesn't have enough strength to pull the door all in one go. And when she saw the nurse, a strange smile forced her old face dangerously awry. Her expression is all very strange and unusual. It's not like a proper smile. It's almost like she's grimacing, like she's giving a very strange expression, because it doesn't look like a proper smile. So Marianne is not, she's really very reluctant. She doesn't want to enter the room. She just stands there. And that is when the nurse actually, who's very strong, it's described, her hand is described as being very strong. And she's also described as being impatient because she just wants to get this thing over and done with. And so what does she do? She propels the young girl, she pushes her into the room. And Marianne suddenly sees that there is another woman, even older, who was lying flat on the bed. And this woman has a counterpane or a bedspread or a bed sheet drawn up to her chin. And then the nurse says, "Visitor," and she pushes her once more and then leaves the place. So Marianne doesn't know what to do. She's tongue-tied. That is, she's unable to speak. And with both hands, she holds the potted plant, and she's really not very comfortable. She has to give she's supposed to be, gifting the potted plant to the old woman, but she doesn't know what to do. And the old woman still has that strange square smile, the terrible square smile, says the writer. And within brackets or in parentheses, it's given that it was a smile of welcome. It is supposed to be a smile of welcome, but then it looks very terrible. It looks very strange. So the old woman was waiting. Perhaps she said something. The implication here, students, is that Marianne has become so very spaced out. She doesn't really know what is happening, and she doesn't know if the old woman has said anything. In fact, it's almost as though she has become deaf. The old woman in bed said nothing at all, and she did not look around. At least this woman, the one who opened the door, is interested enough, or is, able to smile at her, even though it's a strange smile, and she's probably trying to say something. But the other old woman is not interested at all. She's still lying on the bed. She doesn't look around, and she doesn't say anything. So within these two paragraphs, what we get to see is that Marianne's visit, which she was actually dreading, she wasn't really very happy about it. And it turns out to be a very strange experience, as we will be seeing later on, students. Because we will see that later on, because in this particular slide, we can see how these two old women are introduced and how they seem to be very different from each other. We have one old woman, the one who opens the door, at least attempting to be friendly, but the other old woman who is actually sleeping on the bed seems to be very unfriendly. She's not really very welcoming to any kind of visitors. What happens next? My, said the old lady at her side. Marianne stood enclosed by a bed, a washstand, and a chair. The tiny room had altogether too much furniture. Everything smelled wet, even the bare floor. She held on to the back of the chair, which was wicker, and felt soft and damp. Her heart beat more and more slowly, her hands got colder and colder, and she could not hear whether the old woman was saying anything or not. She could not see them very clearly. How dark it was! The window shade was down, and the only door was shut. Marianne looked at the ceiling. It was like being caught in a robber's cave just before one was murdered. This is a very interesting paragraph because, students, if you take a look at it or if you listen to it properly, you will see that Marianne is having a very strange experience. As we've already discussed before, Marianne is certainly not very interested in coming. This is something that she has been forced to do because the Campfire Girls, or the movement, believed in making young children going into society, into the community, and learning how to interact with other people in the community. And this is a very altruistic or very selfless activity actually, but then ultimately it becomes something which is selfish, because most people, most human beings do things because they get something out of it. And here is Marianne, not exactly interested in coming here, but then being forced to come here, and the reluctance is very obvious to us. So what does Marianne do? The old woman says, my, and Marianne feels trapped in this setting, because she can feel, that the old lady is very happy to see her, but she is not happy to see this old woman. So when she stands enclosed by a bed, a washstand, and a chair. It's almost like she is imprisoned, among the furniture and different pieces of furniture, and she feels as if she is imprisoned between, them. So she has this very strange feeling of being like a prisoner. The tiny room had altogether too much furniture. So I just put this picture here because I wanted to show how a room would look, what a room would look like if there's too much furniture. So everything smelled wet, even the bare floor. Everything is wet. Why do you think it's wet, students? Do you think somebody has spilled water over there? See how she describes it. She held on to the back of the chair, which was wicker and felt soft and damp. Her heart beat more and more slowly. Her hands got colder and colder. The room is very cold. Please remember, it's winter outside. So there's snow all around, and that is why the whitewashed building looks as though it's reflecting the sunlight. It's almost like it's a block of ice. So the description is already there, and we already know that it is winter season, and so everything is very cold. The house is also very cold, and because of the season, what has happened is that the interiors of these rooms are not warm; they're all cold and damp. So the dampness is a very strange quality, and it doesn't make her feel comfortable at all. So when she stands there and tries to hold on to the chair also felt soft and damp, she says. And the surroundings get to her. She's almost stressed out, and so her heart beat began to become slow, and her hands got colder and colder. And she's in such a state where she's not able to hear whether the old woman was saying anything or not. So she doesn't really know. She could not see them clearly. How dark it was, she says. It's very dark. The room is very dark. It's not actually very dark, but it's because she's actually undergoing some kind of an episode. There is some kind of a disturbance, and that's the reason she feels as if the room is very, very dark. But yes, the window shade was down and the only door was shut. So probably it is dark, but not as dark as she feels it is. And Marianne looked at the ceiling. And you know what she feels like? She feels like as though she's caught in a robber's cave. And it's almost as though she's going to be murdered. So if you remember, this is probably a reference to a story called Alibaba and 40 Thieves, where Alibaba actually gets to enter Thieves cave, and he knows what the password is to enter, and he knows the password to exit the cave, and he manages to take a lot of gold coins, a lot of treasures. All of them are the stolen goods of the thieves, and he leaves the place. And his brother, who notices his sudden wealth, asks Alibaba what has happened and how he has been able to amass all this wealth. And when Alibaba tells him, the brother is too greedy, he enters the place. He knows the password, but then after entering, he tries to take everything. He tries to take as much as possible, as much treasure as possible, and he tries to come out, but then he forgets the password for the exit. And so he's caught there by the thieves. He's found by them and he's killed by them. And probably this is something which is at the back of Marianne's mind, because she feels trapped in this room, and the room feels very scary, and it's very intimidating, and she feels as though she's been caught in a robber's cave, and she feels as though she's about to be murdered. So it is interesting that this young girl Marianne enters a room which has two old women, and these old women, please remember, are very harmless, but the ambience or the environment or the setting is so dark and so wet, and so it's very scary that Marianne is not happy at all. So she wants to leave the place. She feels as though She's about to be slaughtered, about to be murdered. So this is an important passage, students, because it tells her many things about the status, of Marianne's mind. Then what happens? Did you come to be a little girl for a while? The first robber asked. So look at how the old woman, instead of saying that the first old woman said this, the narrator says that the first robber said. So this is not the author saying anything. It is actually the author or the speaker trying to interpret Marianne's mind. So in Marianne's mind, the old woman is like a robber who's about to kill her. So did you come to be here to be our little girl for a while? The first robber asked. Then something was snatched from Marianne's hand, the little potted plant. Flowers, screamed the old woman. She stood holding the pot in an undecided way. Pretty flowers, she added. Then the old woman in bed cleared her throat and spoke. They are not pretty, she said, still without looking around, but very distinctly. Marianne suddenly pitched against the chair and sat down in it. Pretty flowers, the first woman insisted. Pretty, pretty. Marianne wished she had the little pot back for just a moment. She had forgotten to look at the plant herself before giving it away. What did it look like? Stinkweed, said the other old woman sharply. She had a bunchy white forehead and red eyes like a sheep. Now she turned them toward Marianne. The fogginess seemed to rise in her throat again, and she bleated, "Who are you?" So what happens in this particular slide, students? If you remember, the other old woman who's lying on the bed did not actually respond to the girl who entered the room. And so it is when the first lady says, did you come to be a little girl for a while, and then takes the pot in her hands and says that these flowers are pretty, it is then that the old woman in bed actually reacts, and she clears her throat and says, they are not pretty. And look at what happens after that, what the narrator says. They are not pretty, she said, still without looking around, but very distinctly. So how would this old woman know anything about these flowers? It's just that she has not seen them, but she wants to say anything and everything that is contradictory to what the other woman has said. And so she says they're not pretty. But the first woman says, pretty flowers, pretty. And Marianne suddenly feels that she should actually have taken a look at the flowers. She has absolutely no idea what the flowers are going to look like. And so she says, I wish I had the little pot in my hand for a moment. And look at what the other old woman says. Stinkweed, said the other old woman sharply. So she's so angry, she's so frustrated that these flowers are, said to be stinkweeds. She has not even seen them. She had a bunchy white forehead and red eyes like a sheep. Now she turned them toward Marianne. The fogginess seemed to rise in her throat again, and she bleated, who are you? So what does this old woman say? The other old woman in the bed, stinkweed, she says. Right? And then she says, look at the description. She had a bunchy white forehead. There are all, there are lines on her forehead, and red eyes like a sheep. So look at the sheep metaphor, students. The writer keeps referring to sheep in this short story. Then she looks at Marianne, and again, it seems as though there is a fog in her throat because her voice becomes very indistinct, and she bleated, says the writer, who are you? So she wants to know who this girl is. So she says, who are you? And to her surprise, Marianne could not remember her name. Why do you think she's not able to remember her name? She's feeling disoriented. She's actually come to a strange place, and she's meeting strange people. So she's not really interested in staying here. So maybe that's why she's not actually giving them her name. If you remember, in the first part of the story, when the nurse had asked her about the details, she had just said that she's a Campfire Girl. So that time around, it was because she did not want to reveal her name. But now she doesn't remember her name at all. Though she wants to tell the old woman her name, she's unable to do that. So to her surprise, Marianne could not remember her name. I'm a Campfire Girl, she said finally. Watch out for the germs, said the old woman like a sheep, not addressing anyone. One came out last month to see us, said the first old woman. A sheep or a germ? wondered Marianne dreamily, holding on to the chair. Did not, cried the other old woman. Did so, read to us out of the Bible, and we enjoyed it, screamed the first. Who enjoyed it? Said the woman in bed. Her mouth was unexpectedly small and sorrowful like a pet's. We enjoyed it, insisted the other. We enjoyed it. You enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, she said. We all enjoyed it, said Marianne, without realizing that she had said a word. So what is actually happening here, students? We have these two old women, the first woman and the one on the bed, actually having an argument. This argument seems like an ongoing argument. It's not as though it's a new issue. So they keep quarreling, they keep contradicting each other, they keep disagreeing with each other. And so when the first old woman says, you know, one came out last month to see us because earlier this young girl, Marianne, has actually introduced herself and she had said that she's a campfire girl. And that is when the other old woman says, watch out for the germs. We do not know why she says this out of the blue. She just says, watch out for the germs. She's not actually looking at Marianne or the other old woman. She's not, trying to say anything to them. She's just saying it in a general way, where she says, watch out for the germs. One came out last month to see us, said the first old woman. And Marianne has this interior monologue, or she's talking to herself, where she asks, a sheep or a germ? Watch out for the germ, said the old woman, like a sheep. The way she speaks sounds like a sheep. And that is why, even though the first woman says one came out last month to see us, and she actually means the young girls, the campfire girls, Marianne feels slightly confused. She doesn't know whether this old woman is referring to a germ or a sheep. And Marianne wondered dreamily, holding on to the chair. This is because Marianne is actually not in her whole senses. She's not in a complete senses. She's still probably in a state where she doesn't know what is happening. She's very confused. She's very scared. And so she says, a sheep or a germ? Did not, cried the other old woman. The other old woman is trying to say that nobody had come to see them a month ago. And here is the other girl, probably the other campfire girl, who actually had come to visit them earlier and who had read from the Bible. But the first woman is trying to convince the second woman, but the second woman is not ready to be convinced because she is very sure that nobody had come. So did not, cried the other old woman. Did so, read to us out of the Bible, and we enjoyed it, screamed the first. And then the woman in the bed says, who enjoyed it? Her mouth was unexpectedly small and sorrowful, like a pet's. Her mouth becomes very small. She's actually very sad. Probably she's dying and she feels very, very sick and she's not very happy. We enjoyed it, insisted the other. You enjoyed it, I enjoyed it. And Marianne suddenly says, we all enjoyed it. She doesn't even realize that she said anything, but it just comes out of her mouth like that. Okay, so the next slide. The first old woman had just finished putting the potted plant high up on top of the wardrobe where it could hardly be seen from below. Marianne wondered how she had ever succeeded in placing it there, how she could ever have reached so high. You mustn't pay any attention to old Addie, she now said to the little girl. She's ailing today. Will you shut your mouth? Said the woman in bed. I'm not. You're a story. I can't stay but a minute, really. I can't, said Marianne suddenly. She looked down at the wet floor and thought that if she were sick in here and they would not let her go. They would have to let her go. Without much to do, the first old woman sat down in a rocking chair, still another piece of furniture, and began to rock. Right? So what happens in this particular slide, this part of the story, students? The first old woman somehow manages to put the potted plant high on top of the wardrobe, and it's not, visible from below. It could hardly be seen from below. Marianne wonders how this old woman has managed to put it on the wardrobe, on top of the wardrobe, because she would never have reached the wardrobe. And then what does the woman say? The first woman say, "You mustn't pay any attention to old Addie," she now said to the little girl. She's ailing today. She's trying to say that the other woman is not well, and that is why she's probably being very harsh or rude. Will you shut your mouth? Said the woman in bed. I'm not. The old woman in bed is not ready to accept that she's either old or sick. You are a story, she says. Of course, she doesn't believe the other woman because she knows very well, the first lady knows very well that this other woman is really sick. And then Marian is suddenly gripped with this kind of a feeling where she cannot stay for another moment. And she says, I cannot stay, I can't stay but a minute. Really, I can't, said Marian suddenly. She looked down at the wet floor and thought that if she were sick in here, they would have to let her go. So she looks down at the wet floor. As we've already seen, the room is all damp and wet. There's a lot of moisture in the room. And so she feels, what if she suddenly became sick? What if she vomited on the floor? Then they would definitely let her go, she thinks. This is a thought which crosses her mind. With much to do, the first old woman sat down in a rocking chair, still another piece of furniture, and began to rock. So, what does the first old woman do? She actually discusses many things with the other old woman, and Marianne is not very happy. She looks at the wet floor and she thinks, if I actually fall sick, probably they let me go. There is this stream of thoughts in her mind. She's actually thinking many things. And the other old woman, uh, you know, with a lot of fuss, with a lot of importance, she sits down in the rocking chair. And the narrator says, still another piece of furniture. The room is already full of different types of different items of furniture. And this rocking chair is yet another piece of furniture. And the old woman sits in the chair and she begins to rock. So with this, we come to the end of today's lesson, students. So what we will do is, in the next class, we will be completing this short story, and we'll then look at the overall summary or the overall ideas or themes that are present in the story. So that is all for today, students. Let us end it here. Bye and have a good day.